Well, once again, good morning to everyone. It's really nice to see you all and to feel this connection from all different parts of the world. I still really am amazed with this positive side of technology. I mean, it is wonderful. So, this morning, as part of our series, we'll be exploring some of Krishnamurti's and others and my own insights on compassion and what some people might call its opposite, indifference. Um, Compassion is, of course, is really at the root of all of the spiritual traditions: Buddhism, Christianity, Sufism, Islam, uh, Judaism. It's all there. The thread, I call it the golden thread of seeing yourself as the other, and genuinely and completely and fully, with all your being, feeling that love. Now, of course, this has been talked about for centuries, and we're still in a world that is terribly divided and in great need of a lot more compassion. So, the inspiration, as most of you know, for this is Krishnamurti's insight statement, however you want to look at this, that the human crisis is so extraordinary, so intricate, so subtle, that it urgently demands that we have a new mind and a new heart. And of course, he is not separating the mind and the heart, because when we have, it's the mind that separates itself, you could say, from the compassion of the heart. It's the divided mind. And when there is a quiet mind, there is unity, there's no me, and so everything is new, everything is alive and one. And further, to add a little bit to this, to live in this world sanely, there must be a radical change of mind and heart in us, not just not just everybody else out there. So I thought I would begin with a question. How will we remake the world? We know the world is in trouble. We see it every day. So will we remake this world with compassion or with indifference? It's not a rhetorical question. It's something each one of us can answer for ourselves. So one of the questions I wanted to begin with, because we're always talking about compassion in the context that does not usually include ourselves. And I don't mean, self-pity, but do you have compassion for yourself? Compassion for your own inner journey through loss and grief. This has been a year and a half of grieving for so many people. And so I think it's important to recognize that, to take a step back and recognize that we have all been through quite a journey together, and yet separately because of the way the pandemic has separated us. So this question, do you have compassion for yourself, is something you don't have, you're not asking you to answer it here, but I'm just suggesting that it might be a way in a quiet moment to look within and give some attention to what the last year and a half has been, how you have navigated it all without judging any of it, and genuinely feel what you feel. Genuinely feel what you feel. Because I think many of the people I talk to are just shoving it down somewhere and just trying to get through this. Now, again, these are questions that need not be answered right now, but do you feel love and gratitude for the privilege of living and learning, despite what is happening in your life and in the world? Have you ever considered that being alive is a privilege? We just mostly take it all for granted until something happens that reminds us of our mortality. We are ill prepared for the privilege of living. And this is in a poem by, she's Polish, so I'm going to have difficulty pronouncing her name, Wisława Szymborska. She won the Nobel Prize in 1996 for her poetry that really addresses the way we live our lives or pretend to live our lives, because we're so often outside of our lives. And so what I want to do, because I think this fits the morning, and it fits the non-dual and Krishnamurti's, some of Krishnamurti's way of expressing this, only not in these words. So this is just a little piece of a poem called Life While You Wait, the play of life. I know nothing of the role I play. I only know it's mine, and I can't exchange it. I have to guess on the spot just what this play's all about. Ill prepared for the privilege of living, I can barely keep up with the pace that the action demands. Now, when I read this really spoke to me because, of course, Shakespeare said it, Ramana Maharshi, everyone has said this. We are living a script. We've been handed a script at birth, as it were, before birth. And because we are not aware of what's going on, we're just walking through, we're almost talking to ghosts most of the time, the ghosts of the past. And that is what makes us ill prepared for the privilege and the beauty of living. And that's why bringing awareness and attention to how the mind actually functions is the foundation to everything else. It's the foundation to compassion. And of course, most of you know this is one of my favorite lines of Krishnamurti. When I understand myself, I understand you. And out of that understanding comes love. Of course, the challenge is always this: looking at myself without praise or blame in the moment when indifference or anger or jealousy arise. When I understand that I'm really no different than anybody else on this planet, struggling with the same things daily, love can be born because I know they're just like me. Compassion is not the doing of charitable acts or social reform. It is free from sentiment, romanticism, and emotional enthusiasm. It is as strong as death. It is like a great rock, immovable in the midst of confusion, misery, and anxiety. Without this compassion, no new culture or society can come into being. And so it follows that a flowering of more compassion is how we make the world. As you know, Krishnamurti often said, "You are the world and the world is you." If you are the world, which personally I feel most profoundly, then out of that feeling, I am the world, is the greater, in the greater sense, comes compassion. Now, these are the three, you could say, cornerstones of remaking the world. He says a mutation must take place in the very seed of thought itself. Thought is the enemy of compassion. That's his word, enemy. You could say it's the obstacle in the way of compassion. But he used that word. Without compassion, the sacred can never be found. I believe this is why Krishnamurti laid so much emphasis throughout his life on understanding one's own mind. Because if I understand the root of fear in me, the root of anger in me, dissatisfaction, if I really understand that, if I trace it back and watch it arise in the moment, when there's enough awareness there, then I've got to the very seed of the thought that produces fear. And it does dissolve, at least in that moment. Thought is the enemy of compassion. Without compassion, the sacred, the immensity, the immeasurable can never be found. He says, compassion is not hard to come by when the heart is not filled with the cunning things of the mind. It is the mind with its demands and fears, its attachments and denials, its determinations and urges that destroys love. Now, I'm just going to take a couple minutes to go back and talk a little bit about indifference. And these are just questions for you. They don't have to be addressed right this minute. Why do we ignore the consequences of indifference? What hides beneath indifference? Krishnamurti, one thing he said was habit. Getting used to something is the beginning of indifference. You get used to the squalor of the next village as you pass it every day. In the same way, you get used to the beauty of a tree and you simply do not see it anymore. Now, probably the most visible and substantive discussion ever had about indifference has been by Elie Wiesel. He said the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference, in the way he meant it. Most of you know, most likely, that Elie Wiesel was a Holocaust survivor, Nobel laureate, human rights activist, and a prolific author. He spoke often on the perils of indifference. Now, I met Elie Wiesel many years ago when I was covering the war in Bosnia. I happened to be at a function he was at. And of course, he was surrounded by people. And I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you this because of the impact that meeting had on me. At one moment, he was standing alone in the middle of the room. And I worked up the courage to go and talk to him. And the exchange was such that no one was there. There was only the sense of an exchange, of a deep sense of compassion for each other. Now, he was at Buchenwald concentration camp. And this is a photo that was taken on April 16th, 1945, 5 days after the liberation of the camp. And Elie is right here. And I knew all this about him beforehand. So when we are talking about compassion and indifference, we are talking about earth-shattering, life-changing, world revolution, if we really take this to heart. He said in his book, Open Heart, there are many, many books. Night is the one he won the Nobel Prize for. Even in darkness, it is possible to create light. Life is not a fist. Life is an open hand waiting for some other hand to enter it. Every moment is a new beginning. It is only love that is our redemption. But you cannot have love if there is any sense of domination, any sense of the desire for power, position, authority. This is what is in the way. It's the reptilian brain. It's the conditioned mind that goes all the way back thousands and thousands of years. For me, Krishnamurti's genius is in articulating in a contemporary way what it is we have to look at if we really want a more compassionate world. We have to see this in ourselves. And when we see this in ourselves, there's more understanding about the appearance of the very same thing in other people. And as a result, there is this immense suffering all over the world. He says we have to understand the whole process of our thinking and stop believing what thought tells us. When you stop believing it, the mind does get much quieter. Belief destroys human beings, separates human beings. A man who believes can never love, because to him belief is greater than being kind, gentle, thoughtful. And of course, he's talking about belief systems that dominate and divide us, that cause wars. So coming back to remaking the world with compassion, it begins with a mutation that takes place in the very seat of thought itself, of understanding my mind and what sets it off in a negative way. Thought, the conditioned mind, its fears, attachments, divisions, he says, is the enemy of compassion. And without compassion, the sacred can never be found. And I want to share something from William Blake, who said many of the same things Krishnamurti said, but in a different way. The tree which moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing which stands in the way. As a man is, so he sees. And this is getting back to what Krishnamurti said about indifference. We get used to things, and that's the beginning of indifference. We get used to beauty and forget it's there. What matters is for the mind to free itself from envy, from ambition, from the desire for power, because these destroy compassion. To love, to be compassionate, is of the real. And finally, love is not of time. You can't come upon it through any conscious effort, through any discipline, through identification, which are all a process of time. The mind, knowing only the process of time, cannot recognize love. Love is the only thing that is new, eternally new.